33-year-old trans woman who is imprisoned in a female prison essayed a female inmate in the shower block. A trans woman violently attacked a girl in a resilience school as the girl expressed her discomfort with a trans woman using a women's restroom. A transgender PDF who was caught with over 125,000 child sexual abuse images avoided jail for the second time after a judge determined the trans person would be at risk if sent to a men's prison. 2 trans women in Norway have been convicted of the repeated essay and sexual abuse of a vulnerable young girl. They attempted to use their transgender status as a defense in court. But wait. Let's not just focus on crimes. Let's take a moment to listen to trans people. Let's hear things from their own perspective and do what they always ask us to do and listen to what they have to say.
Welcome to part 5 of Listen to Trans People, where we lift trans voices. I sometimes have violent thoughts about cis women. When I see a pretty cis girl, I get extremely jealous. Why is she so lucky? Why should she get to be so pretty and be born that way? I get so angry to the point I just want to punch them. I would never act on it, but I just hate being near them. I'm so jealous whenever I see a beautiful woman flaunting her beauty and femininity. I just want to hurt her. I especially hate seeing little girls. I have extremely violent fantasies about them, about how I want to destroy their effortless beauty so they suffer how I've suffered. Fantasy, of course. I would never act out any of it. Imagine awesome trans gals tearing out TERFs' tongues and cutting off their hands so they can never speak or type their trans misogynistic ever again. Now imagine those same trans gals using the TERFs' hands and tongues as toys and posting the making trans women's lives hell. I propose that trans women are allowed to violate them as they please with that whiny lesbians are so obsessed with. All TERFs should be both men and women for a year straight, chained down to a bed and fed minimum food to live, not allowed to get up to piss and be forced to bear the resulting kids, which are sent to rational, loving families. That way you can be tortured and possibly give me a future kid for me to love and care for, if I choose not to have one biologically. Thank you so much for being here and listening to Trans People.
I used to be a trans ally. I used to be one of those people who bought the whole trans people just want to exist in peace and aren't causing any harm shtick. That was until I started to see with my own eyes what really goes on in both on the internet and in real life. And I started to notice more and more inconsistencies and plot holes in their reasoning on why they think trans women are women and trans men are men. Misogyny and homophobia, specifically lesbophobia, are the 2 main issues I have noticed within the trans community. Let's start with misogyny.
Let's talk about feminazi. When's the last time you've heard that word? It's kind of like an outdated term, right? It's actually been rebranded by neoliberals into the word TERF. Yeah. So if you've ever been called a TERF, if you were going to advocate for AFAB people, regardless of their gender, or pointing out that gender is a real thing, even though it is a social construct, just like money, just like a lot of things, you will be hated. Yeah, let's stop using the word TERF, because what exactly is bigoted about standing up for AFAB people? I don't get it. I don't get it.
The word TERF initially was an acronym that stood for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist, but unfortunately has now been turned into an insult used by misogynists against women. The definition of TERF now says that it's a person, not specifying a gender, but notice how it's an insult only reserved for women. They might as well just change it to woman, because no man is a radical feminist. I think people forget that. Straight men are the ones who constantly hate crime, beat, and make laws against trans people. But conveniently, feminists are the only ones getting all the hate for quote-unquote transphobia. Radical feminists are the only group on earth who I've seen stand up against femicide, female infanticide, forced prostitution of vulnerable women, female genital mutilation of young girls, period huts, gender apartheid, educational restrictions, dowry deaths. Radical feminists like J.K. Rowling, who founded a sexual assault crisis center, funded rescue flights for Afghan women, and donated half her wealth to charity, now have celebrities and other trans activists leading thousands of people to chant insults at her.
J.K. Rowling!
The reason trans people experience violence and hate crimes is because of straight homophobic and often religious men, not TERFs. But you rarely ever see trans rights activists calling them out. It's always just feminists that they treat like their biggest enemy. The trans community has even gone as far as getting violent against women who speak up. I encourage you to pause and read this. Several acts of violence that they always reserve just for women. A plethora of violent crimes, which will be linked in the description of this video, are being committed by trans people, often trans women especially, and those crime statistics will be counted as crimes committed by women when they're not. Let me put it into perspective for you. Imagine if white SA offenders were allowed to identify as Black and their crime recorded as if it had been committed by a Black man. Imagine the justified outrage. But we are allowing SA offenders to identify as women, and we applaud it as inclusive. They are male crimes. When they're caught committing these crimes, the trans community doesn't care about the victims. They only care about getting their pronouns right and not calling the person the wrong name. Another act of misogyny carried out by the trans community is them coming into and sometimes even taking over women's spaces. We may never be able to have women-only spaces if anyone can just identify as a woman at the drop of a hat.
A visitor to the Women in Engineering conference complained about men sneaking into the event.
Why would a man be there? Why would a man be there?
The author of the video complained that men were running and pushing conference participants to be the first to talk to recruiters. Many commentators noted that the men who attended the event had no shame and that recruiters should have blacklisted them. Social media users also recalled a similar incident at a women's tech conference where crowds of men self-identifying as women crowded among women to get an interview slot.
And these men use terms like trans and non-binary to justify their presence there. And the few remaining spaces that trans people can't access end up getting harassed by them. Here they are nailing animal carcasses to a women's shelter and writing death threats on the doors and windows. It's also infuriating how we're also starting to lose our bathrooms. Women's public bathrooms being converted into gender-neutral bathrooms and men's bathrooms remaining as they are is becoming more common. And I partly blame women's tolerance and acceptance of gender ideology for this. Lesbians are also facing this issue of not being allowed to have our own space, but I'll talk more on that later in the next video. The argument used to justify trans people using bathrooms that don't align with their sex by saying things like, so you rad femmes would like it if a big muscular trans man used the women's restroom, has been debunked in this podcast by Radfem, which you can listen to on Spotify, which is linked in the description. Women being hesitant or unwilling to allow trans women in their spaces is not bigotry or an unfair generalization, but a precaution. When I was a trans ally, one of the first things that made me really start to realize I was supporting the wrong side is the situation of transgender women in women's sport. The obvious unfairness of it all was the first thing that gender ideologists could not justify. This is Fallon Fox, an American MM, a fighter who identifies as a trans woman, fighting Tamika Brents in 2014. Brent suffered a concussion and a fractured skull. She had to get 7 staples in her head. Fox later said, I enjoyed it. I love smacking up TERFs in the cage. I've fought a lot of women and have never felt the strength that I felt in a fight as I did that night. Tamika Brent said in an interview, I've never felt so overpowered ever in my life, and I am an abnormally strong female in my own right. I still disagree with fox fighting. Any other job or career, I have a go at it. But when it comes to a combat sport, I think it just isn't fair. And she was right. It isn't fair. Fallon Fox commented on how punching women makes him feel sexually aroused. I'm sure if they made a trans sports category, they wouldn't want to go. If there were trans bathrooms, they wouldn't go either. They just want to take away the spaces from women and one excuse to physically harm women.